And welcome back to the show this morning at 6:17 on your drive into work as we gonna get things going today. Most bizarre headline of the day: Russia declares state of emergency. Did you hear about this?
A state of emergency?
Yes, state of emergency. Their northern islands were invaded
By whom or what?
polar bears.
Really?
Yeah.
No, they were just filming a Russian Coca-Cola commercial.
Exactly. Well, apparently the Russian villagers are fearful to go outside because they have been invaded by polar bears. So apparently it's white dawn.
I would think any bear would cause alarm. Black, white, brown, I don't care. They're bigger than me. I'm out of here.
So you're not bear racist.
No.
No, gotcha. Okay. You're afraid of all of them equally. Me too. Have you ever watched the movie The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio?
No, I wasn't into that one.
You didn't watch it at all?
I heard about it.
You heard about it?
Yeah.
It's actually a good movie.
If you're into that kind of thing.
Well, what do you mean by that?
It's the kind of thing you like if you're
it's about a guy that he gets...
And he crawls inside a bear carcass to survive.
No,
right?
No, that's a horse. He does that later. He is attacked by a bear.
Oh, okay.
But no, the whole thing is about, he's a trapper.
Yeah.
And they're out, catching, and they get attacked by Indians, and there's a whole story behind the Indians are attacking the trappers and
Sure.
The whole night. So I mean, it's that. But the bottom line is he gets abandoned by one of the guys who leaves him for dead, and so and the guy kills his son, and so the whole thing is a revenge story from beginning to end. You would actually like it because you like these type of movies where there's like good westerns and those things. You would like this movie. Actually, it's and the cinematography is phenomenal.
Which is probably why I won't watch it, because the squeamish factor is way over the line.
I said cinematography is good.
Yeah.
The only squeamish part of it is when the bear attacks him, because it's very realistic. And once you watch this bear attack, you're like, that's why I'm afraid of bears.
Only you can prevent.
Yes. Forest fires and bear attacks.
Right.
Run! So anyway.
The two guys running away from the bear, and the one run past is wise. I just have to run faster than you.
Yeah. Exactly. So
that would be us.
I don't know how I deviated off onto The Revenant, but if you've ever watched the movie, it's actually very good. You would really just fast forward the bear attack
part. I would probably barely survive that.
Shame on you. Anyway, Russia declares state of emergency. I just took the whole show off on a tangent.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. All right, back to reality. So just for the break.
PETA on line 1.
Yes. All right, let's talk about this deal that's currently being putting together. So as I mentioned in the opening kind of monologue here, is that futures are up today on hopes that, we'll get some type of funding deal done for the government. And this has been one of the things that has been kind of weighing on, the minds of investors. But the reality is that even if we have another government shutdown, it's really unlikely to mean a whole. I mean, look, the markets in January, in the midst of this government shutdown, had one of the biggest January runs in like 30 years. So the markets really don't pay a whole lot of attention to government shutdowns because ultimately it doesn't really mean a whole lot. We've been through 30, I forget the number now, we've had so many, but like 30 some odd, government shutdowns throughout the history of the U.S. None of them actually equate to much. And again, we tend to lay off temporary workers. We lay off on what are called non-essential workers. As we've talked about before, I'm not sure when we have them, if they're non-essential, but that's the point. But, the markets in terms of what happens with a shutdown really isn't that much, and it's unlikely to mean a whole lot. However, it is going to be kind of big headline news, and it's going to be things that market participants will be looking at in particular. And it does have some impact on economic growth. It's expected that the shutdown in the month of January clipped about 0.1% off economic growth. Again, not a lot, but it's something. So if we continue to have a continued shutdown, it could potentially clip a little bit more off of the growth rate of the economy. And of course, that has other impacts as well. But the deal is as I was saying earlier, and the breakthrough really came after Senators Shelby and Leahy and Representatives Lowry and Granger, kind of who are the top members of the Senate and House Appropriations Committee. They met 3 times on Monday night, kind of a last-ditch effort to get a deal done. And everybody, they're kind of patting themselves on the back. I think everybody's going to look at this and say, "Oh, it's a good deal." The reality is that it's not likely to go very far because, as I was saying earlier, it only provides $1.4 billion for some type of border security. Okay, now border security is vastly different than a border wall. The one big statement that Trump has been standing on, and it's going to be very hard for him to back off of at this point, is the funding for the border wall, the $5.7 billion. Expect that this deal gets rejected. And if it gets rejected, we're going to wind up back in a shutdown. The other option is that the deal gets passed as is, and then he just uses a national emergency to get the funding necessary for the border wall. As he said last night in his rally that he had in El Paso, he says the wall will get built. It's just a function of how he's going to do it. So again, kind of pay attention to that. And the reason I bring this up, and the reason that this is probably even more important than the issue of the wall itself or the government shutdown, is that if he takes the tack of using a national security measure to build the wall, it's going to even more deeply divide Congress. Because this is basically, telling Congress, your vote doesn't matter. I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. This is going to immediately shove another wedge in between the right and the left in Washington. And between now and 2020, this would likely shatter any possibility of any type of legislation getting passed. So if you were kind of looking for additional tax cuts or some type of infrastructure spending package or something, that is likely to become that is going to become very, very unlikely because of the deep division that will occur if he takes the tack of using national emergency kind of orders to build the wall. So again, kind of the bigger impact to the economy and the markets could be a more aggressive tack into getting the border wall funded. So, and this has nothing to do whether you agree with it or not. It's just kind of the simplicity of life and what's going to possibly happen politically that affects the economy and the market. So do watch this because this is going to have, a fairly big impact here over the next few days. So again, may not immediately set in, but something that will likely weigh on outlooks as we go forward. As I also said, the China trade talks are likely to be extended at this point. These tariffs, of course, have been, weighing on corporate earnings. We've been looking at corporate earnings, listening to what corporations have been saying, and a lot of these companies are directly attributing softer earnings growth and softer revenue growth directly to the impact of tariffs on their business. So, as we look at the fact that we're about to have the first earnings recession in 2019 that we've had really in about the last decade, it's the impact of these tariffs and getting those tariffs revised or removed is going to be very important for the markets and, of course, for earnings. Tax cuts worked well last year in terms of boosting earnings growth because of the bottom line impact caused by reduced taxes. Now, didn't increase revenue necessarily at the top line because revenue is what comes from you and I out there spending money, but the each dollar that was earned in revenue had a bigger effect on the bottom line because of just paying out less taxes. Well, since we measure earnings growth on a year-over-year basis, the impact of those tax cuts will end after this quarter because right now, January, February, March, we're now reporting earnings for the fourth quarter of 2018. Beginning in April, we'll start looking at earnings for the first quarter of 2019, and we'll compare those earnings to the first quarter of 2018 when tax cuts took effect. So immediately what will happen is the year-over-year growth rate of earnings is going to quickly diminish back towards the actual economic growth rate of the economy. So again, this is why we're starting to look at potentially a negative earnings cycle this year. And of course, when you start talking about valuations and prices of the markets, and yes, while we had a correction last year, which reduced the valuations of the market, the rally that occurred between the 24th of December and now has increased those valuations. So valuations are rising, and if earnings begin to reduce, valuations will rise even more. So again, we're still running at extremely elevated levels of valuation that we haven't really seen except at only a few other points in history, generally at the peaks of secular bull markets. So, these are all have impacts towards the markets over the course of the year, but these trade talks are going to have the biggest impact potentially to earnings growth. A removal of these tariffs will certainly help earnings growth by the end of this year once those get removed. But the problem, as I've said before, is that China really has no intention and really there's no benefit for them to back off of their stance, because they are not going to give up technology issues, because that's very important for their 50-year growth plan. So at this point, there's very little incentive for them to come to the table. And this is why China is talking down these trade negotiations in China, because they really aren't coming to the table in quote unquote good faith to actually get a deal done. We're much more optimistic about getting a deal done, because it's impacting us more than it is them right now. So, all right, take a quick break. We'll come back. We've got a podcast coming out this afternoon with Pedro da Costa. We'll talk about that when we come back from the break. Don't go away.
Get daily investment news you can use, delivered at the speed of the internet. Sign up for Lance's newsletter now at lancerobertshow.com.